She sold the disabled girl's wheelchair. Not by accident. Not because it was abandoned. She listed it. Took pictures. Put a price on it. And sold it to a stranger, for $50. All because it violated HOA aesthetics. What she didn't know. The girl's mother was a federal judge. And she was done staying silent. It happened in a quiet cul-de-sac in Northern California. One of those neighborhoods with pristine lawns, beige garage doors, and HOA newsletters typed in Comic Sans. The kind of place where people pretend nothing bad ever happens. Until it does. Emma was 12. Bright, funny, obsessed with space and dinosaurs. She'd been in a wheelchair since she was 7, after a spinal cord injury from a car crash. But that chair? It wasn't just metal and wheels. It was her independence. Her freedom. And it had just vanished. When her mother, Judge Allison Grant, came home that Thursday afternoon, the first thing she noticed was Emma sitting on the porch steps. Alone. No chair. No ramp. Just her daughter trembling, holding herself upright with both arms and a face red from crying. "What happened?" she asked. Emma didn't answer right away. She just pointed to the garage. The wheelchair was gone. Allison rushed to check the security camera. The footage showed a familiar figure, mid-50s, short gray-blonde bob, khaki pants, polo shirt tucked in military tight. Karen. Technically her name was Deborah Karen Whitlock, but no one called her Deborah. She was the acting president of the HOA, a title she took more seriously than most law enforcement officers took their badges. She wore it like armor, walked the streets like a warden patrolling a prison. And on that camera footage? There she was. Dragging the wheelchair out of the garage. Opening the gate. Loading it into the back of a stranger's pickup truck. And waving, smiling, as they drove off. Allison didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply clenched her jaw, closed the laptop, and said the words that would trigger the firestorm to come. Call the sheriff. Because what Karen had just done wasn't just cruel. It was illegal. And she was about to find out what happens when you steal from the wrong mother. Everwood Lane looked perfect from the outside. Tree-lined streets. Kids on scooters. Retired veterans mowing their lawns and sink every Saturday morning. A safe, middle-class neighborhood with good schools, good fences, and a strict HOA charter that had been revised more times than the U.S. Constitution. But behind the trimmed hedges and polite smiles was control. Deborah Karen Whitlock didn't start out as the enemy. She was just another neighbor with a clipboard, until the former HOA president moved to Arizona and left a power vacuum. Karen stepped in. And never stepped back. At first, it was minor things. Notices on doors about grass being a quarter inch too long. Emails about unauthorized Halloween decorations. Complaints about trash cans being left out 30 minutes past pickup. But it didn't stop there. She rewrote entire sections of the community handbook. Started walking the street every morning with a body cam. For documentation. And worst of all, she weaponized the aesthetic standards clause. Every homeowner in Everwood Lane had to submit photos and descriptions of any items kept outside their garage. Even ramps. Even medical equipment. Allison Grant had lived on the block for 6 years. She moved there after her appointment to the federal bench, wanting a quiet place to raise her daughter. Emma had grown up in this neighborhood. Learned to wheel herself up the sidewalk, made friends at the local park, decorated her chair with glow-in-the-dark stars. Her chair wasn't just a medical device. It was an extension of who she was. After the accident, Allison converted half their garage into a small accessibility zone. Ramp, wheelchair charger, a second-hand lift. HOA bylaws required the door to remain closed, but they made an exception, at least, until Karen came along. Karen filed 6 complaints in 3 months. Cited. Visual clutter. Said the open garage made the neighborhood look less uniform. Allison responded with calm professionalism. She reminded the HOA that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, accommodations had to be made for accessibility. Karen didn't like that. Not one bit. She started knocking on neighbors' doors, trying to rally them around the idea that granting too many exceptions would lead to property value decline. Some followed. Most just stayed quiet. Until that Thursday afternoon, when Allison returned from court and found her daughter sitting on concrete, arms scraped, eyes full of shame. Emma had wheeled herself out to enjoy the sun while her mother was gone. She liked reading there, said it made her feel normal. But while she was inside grabbing her book, Karen made her move. The gate had been left unlocked. The garage door cracked open. In less than 3 minutes, the wheelchair was gone. Emma crawled to the porch and waited. The pickup truck that took the chair had no plates. But Karen? Karen was front and center in the footage, smiling like she'd done the neighborhood a favor. Allison didn't hesitate. She called the sheriff. Then she called her colleague at the U.S. Attorney's office. Because this wasn't a dispute about trash bins or lawn gnomes. This was theft. Targeted. Discriminatory. And the victim was a minor with a disability. Neighbors gathered as word spread. Some tried to defend Karen. She probably didn't mean harm. Maybe she thought it was abandoned. But the video said otherwise. Karen had walked into the yard, opened the garage, checked the chair, and helped load it up. There was no note, no notice, no permission. Just pure entitlement. Allison stood in her driveway that night, looking at the empty space where the chair used to sit. She wasn't thinking about courtrooms. She wasn't thinking about her title. She was thinking about her daughter, about how helpless she must have felt watching someone take her freedom away, piece by piece. And that's when she made a promise. This wouldn't be buried under bureaucracy. This wouldn't be another HOA slap on the wrist. This time, Karen was going to learn exactly who she'd messed with. The sheriff's deputy arrived the next morning. He was young. Nervous. Name tag read Griffin. First month on the job. He stood in Allison's driveway with a clipboard and a practiced, neutral tone. "Ma'am, I reviewed the footage. And yeah, it clearly shows your neighbor entering the garage and removing property." Emma watched from the porch in her backup chair, an old, rusted loaner from the hospital, too small and barely rolling straight. Allison kept her tone measured. "So, what happens next?" Griffin hesitated. "Well, I was told to follow protocol and pass this to the HOA mediation board first. They want to handle it internally." "Internally?" Allison's voice sharpened. "Yes, ma'am. Mrs. Whitlock insists it was a community matter. She claims the chair was a hazardous obstruction left unattended in a visible area." Griffin read from his notes like a script. "She said she had full HOA authority to dispose of non-compliant equipment." Allison didn't blink. "Did she mention that the equipment belonged to a 12-year-old child with a spinal injury?" Griffin shifted uncomfortably. "She said she thought it was abandoned." "That's not what the footage shows." "I agree," he admitted, "but I've been asked to wait on filing an official report." Allison nodded slowly. "I understand." She walked back inside without another word. And that was mistake number 2. The first was stealing the chair. The second was underestimating how quiet a federal judge can be when she's planning something devastating. Later that afternoon, Karen strutted down the block like nothing had happened. She wore her usual outfit, polo shirt, khakis, clipboard. Her eyes scanned every lawn, every trash bin, every flower pot for the slightest violation. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Some were disgusted. Most were afraid. She stopped in front of the Grant's house. Looked at the temporary ramp Allison had installed the night before, ADA compliant, professionally built, but unapproved by the HOA. Karen whipped out her phone and took pictures from every angle. Then she started writing. "Excuse me," a voice called from the porch. "Emma." Wrapped in a blanket, sitting still. Karen looked up, surprised. The girl's voice was soft, but clear. "You took my wheelchair." Karen crossed her arms. "I removed a safety hazard." It was left unattended in a shared space. That's not true, Emma said. Karen's lips curled. Little girl, I've been running this neighborhood longer than you've been able to spell it. Don't get smart with me. Emma didn't say another word. She just rolled back inside. That evening, a notice appeared on the Grant's front door. Violation, unauthorized ramp construction. Fine, $500 per day until removed. Karen had signed it herself. Stamped with the HOA seal. The next morning, Allison filed 3 separate motions. One with the local sheriff's department. One with the county ADA compliance board. And one, sealed, with the U.S. District Court. Karen had no idea what was coming. She still thought this was a turf war. A petty squabble. An HOA matter. So when Allison showed up to the next HOA meeting, dressed in a black suit with a leather binder under her arm, Karen rolled her eyes. You're not on the agenda, she snapped. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. Karen scoffed. Fine. 2 minutes. The room was packed, neighbors curious after the wheelchair rumor, most still unsure what to believe. Allison stepped forward. Calm. Collected. Deadly. My name is Allison Grant. I've lived here for 6 years. Some of you know me as Emma's mother. She opened the binder. But professionally, I'm a sitting federal judge appointed by the President of the United States. I oversee civil rights litigation, including cases involving ADA violations, municipal overreach, and discriminatory enforcement of HOA policy. The room froze. Karen's face went white. Allison continued. Last week, my child's wheelchair was taken, without consent, without notice, and in direct violation of both state and federal protections. It was sold to a private buyer for personal gain. I have video evidence, a timeline, and sworn witness statements. Karen stood up. Now wait a minute. I'm not finished. Her voice sliced the air clean in half. This is no longer an HOA matter. This is criminal theft, civil rights abuse, and malicious intent against a minor with a documented disability. And I intend to pursue every legal avenue, locally, federally, and publicly, until justice is served. Gasps filled the room. Karen's clipboard slipped from her hand. A neighbor in the back whispered, "Holy crap." Allison closed her binder. Karen, you may have the power to find someone for weeds in the yard. She stepped closer. But you don't get to steal from a disabled child and call it aesthetic enforcement. And with that, she turned and walked out. The room erupted. But Karen? She didn't move. Because for the first time in her life, she was no longer the one in control. Karen didn't show her face the next day. Or the next. Her daily patrols stopped. The HOA newsletter, usually emailed every Friday like clockwork, was silent. No fines. No complaints. Just silence. But the neighborhood wasn't quiet. Word spread fast. About the federal judge. About the theft. About the fact that Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd bulldozed through it, waving her clipboard like a sword. And then came the subpoenas. By Monday morning, Karen received a hand-delivered summons from the sheriff's office. One for theft of private property. One for violating the Americans with Disabilities Act. And one, this one sealed, for a federal civil rights investigation. The buyer of the wheelchair, a local junk reseller, had already been located. He turned over receipts, text messages, and, most damning, a photo Karen had sent him with the message. HOA confiscated property, yours for $50. Practically brand new. There was no denying it. No twisting the story. And for the first time, Karen had no way out. At the emergency HOA board meeting the following night, Karen tried to defend herself. She showed up late. No clipboard. No usual smugness. She looked smaller. Thinner. Like the power had drained out of her skin. I did what I thought was best for the community, she said, voice trembling. That equipment was left in public view. It lowered our standards. Allison was there. She didn't interrupt. She didn't need to. Because a new voice spoke up. Mr. Patel, the quiet retiree from across the street, stood up. My daughter is in a wheelchair, he said softly. I never said anything before. But I watched Emma grow up. And what you did to that little girl. He shook his head. It wasn't about the community. It was about control. Then came Mrs. Alvarez, the single mom with 2 jobs who once got fined for having a non-regulation mailbox. You fined me $150 because my mailbox was 2 inches too short. You made me cry on my front porch. I never forgot that. One by one, neighbors stood. Stories poured out. The college student who got fined for using a window AC unit. The older couple told to remove their rainbow welcome mat. The mother who received 3 citations for excessive sidewalk chalk. And then Emma. She rolled herself to the front of the room. No script. No fear. My name is Emma. I'm 12. My wheelchair is part of me. And when you took it, you didn't just take something I sit in. You took my ability to move. You made me feel small. Her voice cracked, but she kept going. And the worst part? You smiled when you did it. Silence swallowed the room. Karen looked down. For once, she didn't have a comeback. Didn't have a clause to quote. Didn't have a fine to write. The HOA board voted 7-0 to suspend her immediately. Pending investigation, she was removed from all administrative roles. Her access to community systems was revoked. And the newsletter? It was taken over by a neighbor who ended the next issue with 3 words. Kindness is policy. But it wasn't over. Because federal wheels had started turning. A civil rights attorney from the Department of Justice reached out to Allison within days. The case had potential, precedent-setting potential. Discrimination through HOA enforcement had always existed, but rarely did it involve such blatant targeting of a disabled minor, documented theft, and video evidence. It wasn't just an HOA scandal now. It was national. News outlets picked it up. HOA president sells disabled child's wheelchair, faces federal judge in shocking turn. It was everywhere. Karen's photo. The video still of her dragging the wheelchair. And the headline that sealed her legacy in concrete. She didn't know the girl's mother was a federal judge. The court date was set. Karen tried to delay it, claimed stress, mental strain, even briefly attempted to blame medication side effects. But the court didn't care. The evidence was too overwhelming. The footage. The texts. The sale records. The HOA violation notices written with her signature still drying. And worst of all, the girl. Emma was scheduled to testify via remote video. But when the time came, she asked to appear in person. She rolled into the courtroom in her newly returned wheelchair, now fully repaired and sanitized, with her mother beside her. Everyone stood when Judge Allison Grant entered the courtroom. But not for the reason Karen expected. Because this wasn't Allison's courtroom. She had recused herself from the case. Instead, she sat behind her daughter, not as a judge, but as a mother. And every camera caught it. Karen's lawyer tried to argue that she had reasonable authority under HOA guidelines to remove obstructions from community spaces. But the judge, a sharp-eyed woman with a long history in civil litigation, shut that down fast. Since when is a private, ADA-compliant medical device inside a family's garage considered public obstruction? Silence. Karen sat hunched over, smaller than anyone had ever seen her. She looked like she was trying to disappear into her blazer. The ruling came swift. Guilty. Guilty of criminal theft. Guilty of violating the ADA. Guilty of harassment and targeted discrimination under California Civil Code. The penalties? $15,000 in fines. Restitution to the Grant family. Permanent ban from serving on any HOA board in the state of California. And a mandatory 6-month sensitivity and disability awareness course under court supervision. But that wasn't what broke her. It was the public statement issued by the Department of Justice afterward. They called her actions A gross abuse of local authority fueled by prejudice and unchecked ego. That headline ran everywhere. And Karen? She became a walking cautionary tale. Her name was removed from all HOA documentation. Her email access revoked. Her code to the clubhouse was permanently disabled. Neighbors who once stayed quiet now avoided her completely. Real estate agents whispered that her house would never sell at full value again. Emma, meanwhile, returned to school. The principal gave her a plaque in front of the entire student body. For courage in the face of cruelty. She blushed when they clapped. And Allison? She didn't smile until it was all over. Not when the fines came down. Not when the reporters left. Not even when Karen stumbled out of court, red-faced and quiet, like a shadow of her former self. No. Allison smiled 2 weeks later, when Emma wheeled herself across the living room, grabbed her telescope, and said, "Let's go look at Jupiter tonight." From the driveway. Because finally, she wasn't afraid to go outside again. The ramp was still there. Still unapproved by HOA codes. But no one complained. No one dared. Because that ramp? That girl? And that mother? They'd changed everything. The ramp stayed. It wasn't painted the HOA's approved tokray. It didn't match the bricks or follow the visual continuity clause. But it stayed. Neighbors who once flinched under Karen's clipboard now waved from their porches when Emma passed by. Some brought over cookies. Others offered paint supplies to help Emma decorate the rails in her favorite colors, purple and sky blue. Nobody talked about fines anymore. They talked about decency. Emma started smiling more. Her teachers noticed it first, her voice stronger in class, her confidence louder than before. She joined the science club. Gave a talk about gravitational pull and will mechanics. Even won second place at the local STEM fair. Her project? A model of a neighborhood with ramps built into every house. She called it Justice Street. The judges cried. One Saturday morning, weeks after the trial ended, Allison and Emma sat on their porch, sipping lemonade. The air was quiet. Soft. Across the street, the iron gates of Karen's house were wide open. A "for sale" sign staked into the lawn. The grass was overgrown. The windows closed. No laughter. No children. No life. The house looked as cold as the person who once ruled the neighborhood with paper threats and surveillance cameras. Emma looked at her mother. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" Allison didn't answer right away. Then she said, "I hope not." Emma nodded. "Me too." They laughed. And in that moment, under the sun, under the silence, under the slow healing of a fractured community, there was peace. Allison never set out to teach anyone a lesson. She didn't want to be the story. She just wanted her daughter to be safe. To be respected. To be free. But the truth is, she taught everyone something that day. She taught them that justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears sweatpants and pushes a wheelchair. Sometimes it shows up quietly, armed with truth and patience, and changes everything without needing to shout. Karen had the rules. But Allison had the law. Karen had the clipboard. But Allison had the Constitution. And Emma? She had something neither of them could touch. Resilience. The kind that bends but never breaks. The kind that rolls forward no matter how steep the hill. Months later, at the next HOA election, Emma was invited to draw the first name from the ballot box. She giggled as she picked the folded slip and read it aloud. The winner? Mr. Patel. The man who once stayed silent. Now chosen by the very neighbors who had once been afraid to speak. Change had arrived. Slowly. Quietly. Permanently. And it all began because one woman made the mistake of underestimating a little girl in a wheelchair, and the mother who loved her. So if you ever drive down Everwood Lane and see a house with a bright blue ramp, stars painted along the side, and a wind chime shaped like a gavel hanging from the porch, that's not just any house. That's where justice lives.